Hello and welcome to another Magic Duels gameplay. Today we are revisiting the Black-Green Delirium deck, which got a lot of new additions in Eldritch Moon. So the way the Delirium deck works is, it plays a lot of creatures with the Delirium mechanic, and the way that works is, as long as we have 4 or more card types among cards in our graveyard, then a certain positive effect happens. In the Deathcap Cultivator's case, for example, as long as we have Delirium enabled, he gets Death Touch, so that's a nice bonus. And of course, card types include creature, land, instant, sorcery, Planeswalker, artifact, enchantment, and there's a couple more, and that's why we run a number of Delirium enablers, such as a Vessel of Nascency, which puts a number of cards in our graveyard, as well as an enchantment once we sacrifice it. We also have Grapple with the Past, which is actually a new addition from Eldritch Moon, which is an instant that lets us put the top 3 cards of our library into our graveyard, and then we get to return a creature or land from our graveyard to our hand. And then our final Delirium enabler is Gather the Pack, which puts the top 5 cards of our library into our graveyard, and then we get to return a creature card from those 5 cards to our hand, and the rest goes into our graveyard. And of course, Gather the Pack is a sorcery itself, so we'll also put a sorcery in the graveyard, and if we have Spell Mastery enabled, we get to return 2 creatures from those 5 to our hand. So those are the enablers. Then we have lots of Delirium creatures, but let's get started from the bottom here with Gnarlwood Dryad, which is also one of the new additions from Eldritch Moon. So for single green we get a 1/1 creature with Death Touch, which plays defense quite nicely, but once we have Delirium enabled, he gets +2/+2, so turns into a 3/3 Death Touch creature, which can actually attack for quite a bit of damage pretty early on in the game. So a nice addition to the deck, since now we get a 1-drop with Delirium. Then we already covered a Vessel of Nascency. For a single green we get an enchantment, for 1 and a green we get to sacrifice it, reveal the top 4 cards, and then we can return an artifact, creature, enchantment, land or planeswalker from those and put it into our hand. The rest goes into the graveyard, and of course the enchantment itself also goes to the graveyard, so it's pretty likely to enable Delirium just by itself, sometimes needs a little more help. Then we have a Deathcap Cultivator, which is just a nice mana acceleration creature. So for 2 mana we get a 2/1 that can tap for black or green mana, and Delirium gives the Deathcap Cultivator Death Touch, so he can play defense nicely. Then we have a Sylvan Advocate, just a nice value creature, no real Delirium synergies, but for 2 mana we get a 2/3 creature that has vigilance, and as long as we have 6 or more lands he gets +2/+2, and land creatures we control also get +2/+2, and we do have 2 Hissing Quagmires which will get the bonus. Then we have Obsessive Skinner, which for 2 mana is just a 1/1, but when he enters the battlefield we can put a +1/+1 counter on target creature, and as long as Delirium is enabled we can put a +1/+1 counter on target creature at the beginning of the opponent's upkeep. So as long as the Skinner survives a couple of turns, we can put lots of +1/+1 counters on our creatures to make them bigger and survive combat, for example. Then we have a Moldgraf Scavenger, which for 2 mana is an 0/4, but with Delirium he gets +3/+0, so becomes a nice 3/4 for just 2 mana, which is quite nice. Then we already covered Grapple with the Past. Important that it's an instant, so we get an additional card type in the graveyard, because the deck doesn't have a lot of instants otherwise. Then we already talked about Gather the Pack. Then our removal in the deck is in the form of a creature. Kindly Stranger for 2 and a black is a 2/3 creature. Once we have Delirium we can use the activated ability of 2 and a black to transform the Kindly Stranger, and then she becomes a Demon Possessed Witch, which will be able to destroy target creature once she transforms, and becomes a 4/3. So it's nice to have removal in the form of a Delirium creature, because that means we can find it with Gather the Pack or get it back from the graveyard with a card like Grapple with the Past. Then we have Nissa Vastwood Seer, which when she enters a battlefield we get to look for a forest and put it into our hand. and then once we hit land drop number 7 or more, she transforms into Nissa Sage Animist, which can provide a nice bit of card advantage. And of course, since Nissa Vastwood Seer is a creature, we can get it back with cards like Grapple with the Past. Then we have Inexorable Blob, which is a nice aggressive creature. For 2 and a green we get a 3/3, and with Delirium, when the blob attacks, we get an additional 3/3 Ooze token, and that will also be attacking, so keeps multiplying itself, and the opponent will have to deal with it, otherwise they're gonna be dead very quickly. Then a new addition is Mournwillow, 1 a black and a green for a 3/2 with haste, and the Delirium ability here, not super relevant, but it can come up. When he enters the battlefield, if there are 4 or more card types in our graveyard, then creatures with power 2 or less can't block this turn. So of course only relevant for the opponent's creatures, so that means that they won't be able to block or big Delirium creatures with 1/1 tokens or even 2/2 tokens or 2/2 creatures, since they won't be able to block. Then we have Nissa Voice of Zendikar, which is our only actual Planeswalker in the deck, since that helps with Delirium, but it also works quite nicely in the deck since we are a more aggressive Delirium deck than previous iterations, so having the ability to put +1/+1 counters on our creatures is very relevant, but she can also just make a couple of plant tokens and work towards the ultimate of drawing us extra cards. Then another very important addition is Ishkanah, Grafwidow, 4 and a green for a 3/5 spider with a reach. But with the Delirium enabled, when she enters the battlefield, we get 3 1/2 green spider creature tokens with reach on the battlefield, and she also has an activated ability. Target opponent loses 1 life for each spider we control, and of course if we did get 3 spider tokens, that's 4 spiders total, so we get to drain the opponent for 4 life, which is quite relevant in an aggressive deck like this one. Then we also have the Gitrog Monster, which has very nice synergy in the deck. So 3 a green and a black for a 6/6 Death Touch creature, and at the beginning of our upkeep we have to sacrifice the Gitrog Monster unless we sacrifice a land, which we don't really mind to sacrifice a bunch of lands once we already have 5 lands. Then we can also play an additional land on each of our turns, so we can make up for the land that we're sacrificing. And whenever 1 or more land cards are put into our graveyard from anywhere, we get to draw a card. So the obvious synergy with itself is that when we sacrifice a land on our upkeep, we get to draw a random card off the top. But also all those instant sorceries and enchantments like Grapple with the Past, like Vessel of Nascency and Gather the Pack, which randomly can put a number of lands in the graveyard, also will trigger this ability, so we will also get to draw additional cards off of those just from putting lands into the graveyard from anywhere, so that also counts. And then finally a copy of Woodland Bellower, just a nice big 6/5 that lets us look for a green creature with converted mana cost 3 or less and put it onto the battlefield. Can't be a legendary creature, so we can't look for our Nissa Vastwood Seer, but all other green creatures are fair game, so we can look for a creature like, for example, Sylvan Advocate if we have 6 lands, which we obviously have when we can cast a Bellower, but we can also just look for a nice Inexorable Blob, for a nice Delirium creature, maybe can look for a Mournwillow if we need a hasty creature to win the game. So lots of options to choose from. And then our mana base, we are heavily skewed towards green, since we want a lot of green mana in the early game for our Gnarlwood Dryads and our Vessels of Nascency, so that's why we have 13 forests. Then we have 6 swamps, and we're not running any Evolving Wilds in this deck, which might seem a bit weird in a Delirium deck, since Evolving Wilds puts a land into the graveyard, but we are gonna get lands in the graveyard no matter what when we are using cards like Vessel of Nascency or Grapple with the Past, or even Gather the Pack, so that Evolving Wilds is not really necessary, and since our curve is very low, we have a lot of cheap green cards, then it's very important to have those untapped green sources on turn 1, and we don't really want to play a ton of tapped lands like Evolving Wilds. And then we also have the 2 Hissing Quagmire to go with the Sylvan Advocates. And then 2 Woodland Cemeteries, which come into play untapped if we have a swamp or a forest, which we will have most of the time. And then we can take a look at our curve, which is very low with lots of 1 and 2 drops. So that's the deck. Now let's jump into some games and see how the deck does. Alright, let's take a look at our opener, which is a little slow here. Fortunately, we have our only tap land in the deck, but I think we can keep this one. Kind of need to draw some forests ideally, but we do have some very powerful cards once we do enable Delirium, and we have 2 enablers, so should be decent. And alright, gather the pack. So if we want to hit land drops, we have to go with the Grapple or Vessel here. We can't play and sacrifice Vessel here, but if we miss on lands with the Grapple, that's kind of a disaster. So maybe we do just play the Vessel and then sacrifice it next turn. There's less potential for explosive starts, but I think that's safer than playing Grapple and potentially missing. Alright, let's play the Vessel. And also want to play the Gather after the Grapple, since then it's more likely that we have Spell Mastery. Turn 2, Thing in the Ice from the opponent. Alright. At least our Death Touch creatures can attack into it. And a Woodland Cemetery is a nice draw, so we could even play the Blob and then hope to have Delirium next turn if we get really lucky on the Vessel. Downside is if our opponent has something like a Reclamation Sage, they can kill our Vessel, and that would be kind of annoying. And if we sacrifice a Vessel, now we also get to play the Dryad, which I guess is not a bad consolation prize. Alright, I'll bite and sacrifice a Vessel. And let's just get a land here. So we do actually have Delirium, so we get to play the Dryad, which is a 3/3 Death Touch creature. So it can attack into this 0/4 Thing in the Ice. Opponent gets a counter off of it with a Nissa's Pilgrimage, which kind of points into a ramp direction. Obsessive Skinner is not bad. So let's see, we have 4 mana available. We could go Skinner plus one of these 2. Don't have Spell Mastery quite yet. But playing the Blob has gotta be better. So let's attack for 3. See if our opponent knows what Death Touch means. And play the Blob. And hope our opponent can't remove it. Not super likely in blue-green, but we'll find out. 5 mana. And they're gonna play a Jace, which can bounce our Blob. And that's what they're gonna do. But now we get to attack Jace with a Dryad, which is not a bad place to be in. Alright, so we can cast a Grapple to get a land back, but if we don't find other lands, then we risk getting rid of Delirium, which would be bad. So we're definitely going to attack first with our Dryad. So Jace down. And I think we do Grapple here, because I want to hit my land drop so I can cast a Blob. And we can still enable Delirium next turn by just casting a Gather. Alright, we found plenty of land, so get a forest. And play the Blob. And next turn we could cast Ishkanah if we want to. Sylvan Advocate from the opponent is going to be able to block or blob quite nicely. So that's not great, and Elvish Visionary draws a card. Still 3 counters on the Thing in the Ice, so don't really have to worry about that yet. Vessel of Nascency. We can play the Skinner to put a counter on the Blob, and then on the opponent's upkeep we can put another counter on it so it can attack into the Sylvan Advocate, but if our opponent then has a bounce spell for the Blob, that's pretty bad. So in that case just playing Ishkanah would be better, but I think we can still attack with the Dryad since we're okay with trading for any of the opponent's creatures. And see what happens. They just take it. So if the plan is to play the Skinner, might as well play Gather the Pack first, which does have Spell Mastery now. So let's go for it. And we found 2 creatures, which is nice. Also note that the Dryad is a horror, so it won't get bounced by a transformed Thing in the Ice. So we can play the Skinner, put a counter on our Blob, and play the Dryad. So we put a nice bunch of power and toughness into play, telling time from the opponent, end of turn to remove an ice counter from Thing in the Ice. So if they find another instant or sorcery and have one in hand, they could transform Thing in the Ice next turn, but like I said, we still get to keep our Dryads. So now the question is, do we want to put a counter on the Blob if it's going to get bounced by the Thing in the Ice anyways? Or do we just put it on the Dryad? It's certainly close, but I think the upside on the Blob being able to attack is pretty high. So I think I'll just put it on the Blob still and maybe force our opponent to transform the Thing in the Ice even if they don't really want to. So there's the first instant or sorcery in another Nissa's Pilgrimage. And now a pieces of the puzzle. It's going to transform the Thing in the Ice. Still get to keep our Dryad, and Displacement Wave and another pieces is what our opponent is going to get. So Displacement Wave certainly something we have to keep in mind. And our opponent does offer the trade, and I think I accept. Just because of that Displacement Wave, being able to bounce our Dryads for pretty cheap. Opponent has to discard 2 hand size, they discard a forest, which they have plenty of. So Ishkanah also not great in the face of a Displacement Wave. But at least forces our opponent to either play it for 0 to bounce our tokens, or for 5, which is a lot, to bounce Ishkanah altogether. Could play Skinner just to pump the Dryad a bit and get in for some damage. But I think I like just playing the Ishkanah here. So let's hit for 3. Play our Ishkanah and see what happens. Would have liked to hit some more land drops here since we're kind of stuck on 5. But we're still putting up a fight. Opponent meanwhile with lots of mana. Elvish Visionary, a nice card to return with the Thing in the Ice, since they get to draw another card. And there's a Displacement Wave, which could be for 2 to also bounce the Visionary. And that's exactly what our opponent does. But we do get to keep our Ishkanah at least. And there's Sylvan Advocate. Alright, so another Obsessive Skinner. So we can go Dryad, Skinner, Skinner. And that way we can attack with Ishkanah. Don't mind that. Could also replay the Blob, but then we only get to play one Skinner. I think I go with the double Skinner here. And then the counters on upkeep we can put on the Dryad, for example. So that we don't put everything on the Ishkanah. Could also play a Vessel here. So we can sacrifice it next turn, look for a land. But I think I like playing a 3/3 for 1 mana when the opponent's at 6. So upkeep. I think maybe we just put them on the Skinners to spread out our power and toughness a bit. We know our opponent has Elvish Visionary. Alright, sure, let's just put them on the Skinners themselves. And our Death Touch creature still trades for the 4/5 Sylvan Advocate. There's a Nissa Vastwood Seer, which finds a forest and transforms. Opponent still has a bunch of forests in hand from those Nissa's Pilgrimages. Ulamog, the Ceaseless Hunger, is kind of a big deal here. Opponent can't cast it here, but they can cast it next turn. And stuck on 5 mana, that's not where you want to be against an Ulamog. Telling Time. Still have those pieces of the puzzle in hand that we know about. Opponent has 2 creatures and 3 blue mana. There's another Hissing Quagmire, so for opponent blocks our 2 biggest creatures and we activate Hissing Quagmire and they don't have anything, they are dead. So I think we go for it. And they didn't show us any instant speed bounce spells, at least not yet. So it's reasonable that our opponent can't interact. And our other options aren't great. We still get to play another Hissing Quagmire here. Alright, I think we go for it. And hope for the best. Go to combat. Attack our opponent with everyone. And hope not to see any instants. Alright, sweet. On to the next one. Alright, let's take a look at our opener, which is a bit slow with a 5-drop and a 6-drop, but we're on the draw. We have a Delirium Enabler plus 2 decent creatures for the early game, so I think we'll keep. Opponent with Shambling Vent. We'll play a turn 1 a Gnarlwood Dryad. And turn 2, probably Advocate. If we miss a land drop, we could go with Grapple. But we'll see. Turn 2, Plains from the opponent. No turn 2 play. So let's see what we can draw. A Mournwillow. So if we grapple to find a land, we can potentially play Mournwillow next turn. If we Advocate here, then if we still miss a land, we can still grapple next turn. And we can attack for 2, while if we Mournwillow next turn, we can hit for more. So it's interesting here what we want to do. I think we attack first, in case our opponent does something that changes our mind. Since we won't enable Delirium with a single grapple anyways. So I think we go with the higher upside play of playing Advocate. In case we draw the untapped land for the Mournwillow, then we get to play both. Which may or may not be what we want to do, because if our opponent is on a more controlling deck with lots of sweepers, then playing the Mournwillow is not even that great. Opponent has an Oath of Gideon, so that indicates a Planeswalker heavy deck. And we draw a Quagmire, so we'll just be attacking for 2 here. And then we can grapple end of turn. And play the Quagmire. And grappling end of turn will help us inform our decision a bit better, according to what our opponent does on their turn. Probably just gonna get a land, but you never know. Opponent Evolving Wilds. Let's see if they have a third color. Nope, just black-white. And a Liliana, the Last Hope. That's unfortunate, since they get to kill our Dryad. In response, we're gonna grapple just in case we somehow enable Delirium. So instant sorcery, creature, land. So actually, if we don't select anything, our Dryad will be a 3/3 and will survive the Liliana plus. But then we don't get to take Ishkanah. I think it's still worth it, since now we have a 3/3. Next turn we can play Mournwillow with Delirium and kill the Liliana, since a 1/1 won't be able to block. And we draw land, so yeah, things are coming along pretty nicely. Play Mournwillow. We're still in a rough spot if our opponent does have a sweeper, but so be it. So we can attack a Lily for 5, our opponent for 1. And if we find a land next turn, we can play the Gitrog Monster. So does our opponent have a sweeper? Languish and Planar Outburst are the obvious choices. So they're gonna attack first, which kind of makes me think our opponent has a sweeper, so definitely going to block to prevent a damage. And there's a Planar Outburst. Alright. So opponent resets the board. We both have 3 cards in hand and a creature land in play, but our opponent has 1 more land in play than us. Deathcap Cultivator, not bad, so now we get to play Deathcap plus Scavenger, which is a 3/4. Alright, so we got lucky on that grapple, revealing 3 different card types, but we're not out of it yet. Do have 2 of our more powerful creatures in hand, but the Gitrog Monster, when you're stuck on 4 lands, is not ideal. Also when you want to cast a Bellower, but I guess if we draw a land next turn we can just cast a Bellower. There's a Thalia, which will make our creatures and non-basic lands come into play tapped, but luckily we have lots of basics in the deck. So do we want to play the Gitrog Monster is a question, and I don't think we do, as strange as it may sound. So I think we just attack for 3 with our Scavenger and then play a second Scavenger. Opponent takes it. If they have a Declaration in Stone, they have a Declaration in Stone, I guess. We still get to sacrifice one of the clues on the opponent's end step from one of the 2 exiled Scavengers. And that gets us closer to another land. Instead they have a Gisela, the Broken Blade, which is nice for 3 lifelink, flying and first strike. They might also have the other half in Bruna. Untap, find a Grapple, which is a combo with the Gitrog Monster if you can put lands in the graveyard to draw an extra card with the Gitrog Monster. So we don't have any great attacks into a 4/3 life-linking first strike creature. So we could run out the Gitrog Monster, and then next turn Grapple, hope to find some lands. We can get a land back from the graveyard, although that might take away Delirium. But our opponent only has 1 card left. We can kind of use the 6/6 in play, although it will be tapped. Alright, let's go for it. And we can float mana on our upkeep to cast a Grapple. So no good attacks here. If they have Bruna, then we kind of get owned, because then our opponent gets Brisella. Instead they have a Sorin, which starts on 7 loyalty thanks to Oath of Gideon. So they can actually kill our Gitrog Monster if they want to, and that's what they do. Opponent gains 6. Can attack with Gisela if they want to. And they do. But now they're definitely going to lose the Sorin. So we go down to 15, opponent up to 23. And Obsessive Skinner is not a land. Still only have 1 land in the graveyard. Let's see, we have creature, lands, enchantment and instant, so don't want to grapple for land right now in case we take away Delirium. So let's attack first, and no real need to play the Skinner first since we're attacking with both Scavengers on Sorin anyways, and we can't really attack with the Cultivator even if it gets a +1/+1 counter. So yeah, let's kill Sorin. And Skinner is actually not bad, since now our Scavengers can potentially attack into a Gisela if it stays on defense. So now we can grapple. Let's use our black mana. Hope to find land. Alright, we found a Quagmire. We could get back the Gitrog Monster, but that might be a little greedy when we have a Woodland Bellower in hand. So I think we get the Quagmire since we can play that tapped and still play out our Skinner. And then play the Skinner, which can target one of our 2 Scavengers, I think. Yep. And next turn we can play the Bellower. Let's put a counter here and hope our opponent doesn't draw into a Declaration in Stone. Just a land. They can activate Shambling Vent if they want to, but I'll trade for the Cultivator. Alright, that's not bad. From under the floorboards, opponent gets 3 2/2 zombies and gains 3 life. Gets to attack for 4. We go down to 11. Alright, they attack for 7 instead. Put us to 8. I don't think we chum block, even though if we go down to 8, that's a 2-turn clock with Gisela. But we kind of need to find an answer to Gisela anyways, otherwise we lose. So I don't think I want to chum block since we need the mana to cast our Bellower. Alright, so let's see what we can draw. Land is not bad, I guess. So what are we going to get with our Bellower? So I guess we just cast the Bellower and find out. Just need to make sure that we're fast enough here. So nothing great. Sylvan Advocate might be the best one, just because we have the creature land. Blob is also not terrible. Mournwillow doesn't do much since it comes into play tapped, so the haste doesn't matter. Could get back a Skinner to put a bunch of counters on our creatures, but I think it's gotta be the Advocate here. And let's see, how many creatures can we afford to attack with? So, opponent also has a Shambling Vent, so they can attack for a whole lot. Yeah, so we kind of have to keep everyone on defense here. Alright. And where do we put a +1/+1 counter is a question. I think we just put it on a Skinner so it can trade for a zombie at least. Opponent's probably just gonna attack with Gisela and no one else. And we kind of need to top deck a Kindly Stranger, otherwise we're dead. Yeah, if we had that Ishkanah, we would be in a better spot, but then we would have probably lost earlier in the game. So we draw land. We can activate one Hissing Quagmire, but then we're dead. Let's still activate it anyways, just to prove a point. Attack with this, 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 this. And these can all attack into a 3-2 with first strike. Opponent takes it all, that's aggressive. Since if we have a Languish now, they would have gotten owned, but we don't. Alright. Obsessive Skinner, let's give our opponents a +1/+1 counter. And that's gonna be game. Alright, on to the next one. Alright, let's take a look at our opener, which is an easy mulligan. This one's a decent hand. Don't have any of the super powerful early plays, but hopefully Gather the Pack can enable Delirium and get us going. So turn 1 Swamp from the opponents. We could also play the Skinner out on turn 2, which with 2 Mournwillows might actually be what we want to do here. Since we're gonna curve the 2 Mournwillows the following 2 turns most likely, which means having an extra 2/2 attacking is nice, and it's not like we really need the Delirium on the Mournwillow, so it's not like we need to cast a Gather the Pack. So I think I'm fine with playing the Skinner and putting a counter on itself. And hope our opponent doesn't have too many blockers. Looming Spires comes into play tapped, and I guess it's forced to target our creature if there's only one target, but it's not really gonna matter here. And a dead weight on our Skinner won't kill it right now, but as soon as it's our turn, our Skinner is gonna be back to a 2/2 and it's gonna kill it. We drew a Nissa, Voice of Zendikar, which is interesting. So originally we wanted to cast 2 Mournwillows, which could do a lot of damage, but our hand is kind of light on card advantage and on late game staying power, so casting a Nissa and starting to plus it right now could be pretty powerful. So I think I'm okay with playing the Nissa here over the Mournwillows, and should we still want to go on the aggressive plan, we can still start minusing Nissa to put +1 counters on our creatures. So it's not like we're giving up on the aggressive plan altogether, but at least now we have the option of potentially ultimating a Planeswalker, which can be good. Opponent with a Bloodflow Connoisseur, so it looks like they're a red-black steal and sacrifice deck potentially. Maybe they have some Act of Treason effects to steal our creatures and then they can sacrifice them to their Bloodflow Connoisseur. In which case, playing Mournwillow is not great. So I would rather just make some more plant tokens, since playing the Mournwillow gives their opponent an extra attacker that has actual power and toughness, and then they would sacrifice it anyways. So I think I'll start just by casting Gather the Pack and see what we can find. Just a Gnarlwood Dryad, but we do have Sorcery, Enchantment, Land and Creature in the graveyard, so Delirium is enabled. So now the question is, do we even want to play out the Dryad? I guess we do, since we'll have to get those Act of Treasons out of our opponent's hand at some point. and I would rather have them steal our 1-drop than our 3-drop. Although they are comparable in power and toughness. So no attacks. I guess the plant tokens at least are pretty decent against Act of Treason, since we can still just chum block the creatures that are attacking. And there's the Act of Treason. It's gonna steal our Dryad. But only a 1/1 when the opponent controls it, since they don't have Delirium. They're gonna sacrifice it right away. They probably could have attacked first, but they can attack now. And we're just gonna chump. And let's see here, just a forest, so we're gonna play Mournwillow, attack and make a plant. And those 2 blockers hopefully are enough to stop whatever our opponent does, be it another Act of Treason. I guess they can Act of Treason one of the plant tokens, but at least then they're not killing our Mournwillow. There's an Asylum Visitor, so just a 3/1 in this case. Ability doesn't do much yet. And alright, so I guess our opponent is playing some sort of vampire deck, more than just a steal and sacrifice deck, since these are all vampires. And they do have a Bloodsworn, plus they can give it haste, so Nissa is gonna take a hit, unfortunately, so we won't be able to ultimate her. But I think I'm still going to chump the Connoisseur, so that we can still minus Nissa to put counters on our creatures and force our opponent to attack her once again. Or we can just plus her a bunch more, maybe find a removal spell for the Bloodsworn, but we keep drawing lands. So I think we just play Mournwillow. And I think we just cash in this Nissa by putting counters on our creatures. And attack with both our 4/3s. Opponent can block and trade or block and sacrifice to the Connoisseur, but they're probably just gonna trade here. Opponent down to 13. But they do have 3 cards in hand. And their board presence is slightly better, I would say. Once they kill the Nissa at least. There's a Malakir Cullblade, so this gets a +1/+1 counter when one of our creatures dies. So we're just gonna take 2 here. Nissa's gonna die. And let's see what we draw. A Nissa, Vastwood Seer, not bad. Can replace the Nissa that just died. But I think we attack first, maybe just to get a removal spell out of our opponent's hand. And do we want to keep back the plant token to potentially protect our Nissa? I don't think we do, since we're probably just going to make a 4/4 with the Nissa anyways, since we can't really count on the card advantage too long. Opponent blocking is interesting. Alright. So we can play Nissa, and hopefully our opponent can't remove her in response to the trigger. So Nissa triggers, so far so good. So if we plus her, she goes up to 4, but then our opponent can kill her, so I think we just cash her in, make a 4/4, hope our opponent doesn't have another act of treason, and make our opponent attack her. And then we can attack back for a healthy amount. Alms of the Vein. Targeting us, that's fine. So we lose 3, our opponent gains 3. They're gonna attack Nissa. But now we get to attack back for at least 8. And Forest is not what we need. If we can draw into maybe a Grapple with the Past, we can get back our Nissa. Or maybe our Mournwillow. Ishkanah is also a great draw at any point. Titan Strength, not a card I expected, so they're gonna pump the Connoisseur, but they're still gonna trade. But our opponent does get to scry 1. They take 4, down to 11, and might as well play out our land, in case we play and activate a Vessel and still need to play a big creature afterwards. Olivia, that's not bad. It's a 3/3 flyer for now, but future creatures could get bigger. And the 2/1 can't block, so might as well attack with it. But Olivia won't be able to really block our 4/4, so we're kind of in a racing situation, both top decking. Hopefully our top decks can find something good here. Alright, that counts. Inexorable Blob, 3/3 that makes more 3/3s. Is kind of the card you want when you're trying to race. Opponent takes 4 down to 7, play the Blob, and if they miss on their top deck, then I don't think they'll be able to attack with their Olivia. Since then they'll have to chum block or 4/4, take 6, and be in a pretty rough spot. Instead they find a Bloodbond Vampire, 3/3, they can give it haste with the Olivia's Bloodsworn. So they could be attacking for 8, but if they do, then they're dead on the way back. So I'll take it. And their opponents seen the writing on the wall, find another land, attack with everyone, get an ooze, and that's gonna do it. I wanna thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed this gameplay, and as always, have a nice day.